All right, so we're going to look at solving equations in quadratic form. And equation that is quadratic in form is one that can be expressed as a quadratic equation using an appropriate substitution. So an example of a quadratic equation, or an equation that's in quadratic form, we have x to the fourth minus 10x squared plus 9 equals to 0. Well, we're going to rewrite this equation where the highest power is going to be 2 instead of the 4. And the way that we're going to write this equation, we're going to use substitution. So another way that we can write this x to the fourth minus 10x plus 9 equals to 0 is writing this as x squared squared minus 10x squared plus 9 equals to 0. So I'm definitely going to show you how to rewrite an equation that is quadratic in form, but write it as the power of 2. Another example of a quadratic in an equation in quadratic form or in form, we have 5x to the 2/3 plus 11x to the 1/3 plus 2 equals to 0. And we're going to rewrite that equation where the highest power is going to be 2. So let's look at the steps for solving a quadratic equation, or steps to solving equations that are quadratic in form. Number 1, we're going to write our equation in standard form if needed, where we want the equation equal to 0. Then number 2, this is going to be very big. We're going to substitute a variable in for the expression that follows b in the second term. So we're going to look at the expression that follows this variable b in the second term. So we're going to talk about that. And the way that we're going to do that, we're going to substitute your variable for what is in the parenthesis when it is in standard form. Number 3, we're going to solve the quadratic equation. 4, we're going to find the value of the variable from the original equation, and then we're going to check our solution. So we're going to keep this paper in front of us as we solve equations that are in quadratic form. So for our first example, let's look at what we have here. We have x to the fourth minus 8x squared minus 9 equals to 0. And we want to rewrite this equation where the highest power is going to be 2 and not 4. So what we're going to do, number 1, it says, again, make sure our equation is in standard form, and it is equal to 0. Then we're going to substitute a variable in for the expression that follows b being our middle term. So what we're going to do is let's look at the expression that follows b, meaning what's going to follow 8 here. And we're going to write that term here where it's x squared. This is the term that, or the expression that follows the b, which would be 8. And what we're going to do is let u equals to x squared. So with that, wherever we see, we're going to, let me just go back, we're going to rewrite this x to the fourth. Well, as we write the x to the fourth, we want this to be an exponent of 2. So inside what we have here, as we rewrite x to the fourth, we're saying x squared. So x squared squared does give us the x to the fourth. So now wherever we see x squared, wherever we see x squared, we are going to substitute the variable u into that expression. So now we have here u squared minus 8u minus 9 equals to 0. So now we brought it back to a simple quadratic equation. And then we solve it. We can solve it by graphing, we can solve it by completing the square using the quadratic formula, or we can factor. I first try to see if this can be factored, and it can be. So we're looking for factors of -9 that will add to give us -8. And those factors are 1 and -9. So we have here u plus 1 times u minus 9. And then using the zero factor property, we're going to solve for u. Okay, so then set each factor equal to 0, and we solve. So we're going to subtract 1 to both sides. We have u is equal to 1, or u is equal to, excuse me, that should be -1, or u is equal to 9. All right, so we found the value for u at this point. Now let's go back to our steps. So we've solved the quadratic equation that we created in step 2. Now what we're going to do, we're going to find the value of the variable from the original equation. So what we're going to do now is, whereas before we said let u equal to x squared, we're going to go back to what we solved for in u, and where we see the variable u, we're going to plug in x squared. So here we have x squared is equal to -1, and then we have x squared equals to 9. And then let's solve. We know how to solve when there's a power of 2. We take the square root to both sides using the square root property. On the left hand side, the exponent of 2 cancels out, as well as the radical, and we have x is equal to, and remember we have 2 solutions, plus or minus, and what's the square root of -1? It is I. So this is a solution, and then we solve for the second equation, where we're going to take the square root to both sides. Left hand side, the radical and exponent of 2 cancels out, and we have x is equal to plus or minus the square root of 9, which is 3. And we have here 2 solutions. Plus or minus I, plus or minus 3. And then we're done.